I've used over it, okay.
Okay, are we ready?
Ready?
All right, I would like to call this meeting of the Operations Work Group to order. The first agenda item is public input. There was one written statement submitted for this meeting. One in support of knowing the district's plan to address the ongoing substitute teacher shortage crisis. And you can find this comment, the longer version of it, attached to the public comments section in the agenda. Jesse, do we have any public appearances? We have no public appearances, virtual or in person. With that, I move to approve the minutes from the Operations Work Group meeting dated January 23rd, 2023.
Second, Nikki Vandermeer.
Second from Nikki. Do we have Joanna with us tonight?
Yeah, I'm right here.
All right. Hi, Joanna. Your advisory vote on the minutes?
Yep, I approve.
Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Minutes pass 7-0. All right. Tonight we have a bit of a packed agenda. We have the recommendations from the Citizens Ad Hoc Committee on renaming Jefferson Middle School, budget development and staffing workbooks, and an update on referendum projects. Before we begin tonight, Dr. Jenkins, would you like to open us up?
Yes, first of all, thank you so much, Board Member Smith, and to the board, to the community. It was just really a wonderful opportunity for us again, as we've been through a renaming process before to have our community really in where we are and what's reflective of what we're also doing. So very excited to see that tonight. Also, we have the budget. As we've been talking about the budget, our CFO has just been wonderful in articulating in terms of where we are. We know our current state of the state right now still indicate where we are with our joint finance committee, given 0 and 0%, and we're working through that as we have made some. We're very appreciative of the support that's come from the governor and other legislators in different ways in supporting us through the answers, what we were doing. But we know our reality is still here with our budget. Right now, we have an index that's showing 8%. Actually, but we have a budget that we know that we've been wrestling with over the last number of years with declining enrollment. And tonight you're going to hear from our CFO, just a reminder, this is not new. This is a reminder, but he's going to articulate it in a way tonight that's going to give us a clear picture of what it's looked like the last 10 years in terms of the increases that we've seen. He's going to articulate again tonight the fact that we know we have to invest in our staff. There's a deep appreciation from this community, from this board, from this administration that we know we need to invest in our staff. We're also going to mix this a little bit with our reality of where. So when you say invest, where, when, and how much. So very pleased to hear that. And so we're also going to hear the great updates about the referendum. We thank again our community. Wow, historic referendum. How proud must we be of that? $350 million in a tough time during a pandemic, right? We all went out and we pushed and we came to the table and we were able to do some wonderful things with our buildings. It just stick out of my mind, the 41 playgrounds. Every time I drive through the community and I see our children out there on the weekends, it's special. But when you go to the schools and see them in new spaces, you also now are beginning to see new learning spaces in our schools. That's exciting. So many things. You'll hear about that tonight, and you'll see how we're marching to be fiscally responsible on time with the referendum. So I ask that everybody join in tonight. Tonight is a very serious conversation. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to open up as we go through this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins.
Chair, I have to recuse myself on the Jefferson naming committee due to a conflict of interest with one of my legal cases.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for letting us know.
May I leave the table and then come back? Or would you like me to remain in the room?
It's up to you.
Actually the door has to be open, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
I will be right back. I'm going to just grab a drink of water and then.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Board Member Vandermillen. So the next item on our agenda are the recommendations from the Citizens Ad Hoc Committee on renaming Jefferson Middle School. And just to give a quick, again, summary of where we're at in this process, the ad hoc committee to rename Jefferson Middle School met from May to June of 2022, and then again from October to December of last year to consider 38 proposals submitted from the community for consideration. The 4 names forwarded from the ad hoc committee include Eston Hemmings Jefferson, Ezekiel Gillespie, Maya Angelou, and Sally Hemmings. And this is the first time in a school renaming process that I can think of where we have multiple names submitted to the board for our consideration. We will be voting on the name change at the end of February in our regular board meeting. We held an initial discussion at the instruction work group last week, and this will be an action item again, like I said, for the end of the month. What I'm suggesting for tonight is a discussion of these 4 options and your thoughts after reviewing the research from the ad hoc committee. Are there any process questions before we start or information that people feel they still need? There was a lot of information provided in board docs and all of the naming suggestions and the research that went along with that. So I would again like to thank the committee members and our committee co-chairs, Letitia Nelson and Sully Rodriguez, who chaired this committee and brought forward these recommendations. Board Member Nichols.
Right, thank you. When we had our discussion about, we didn't really have a discussion, but when we had our instruction work group last month and we knew that we had 4 names, as I recall, we were trying to figure out how we might narrow the list of 4 names down to maybe a couple that we could then bring to our February regular board meeting for a vote. So I'm coming in tonight with a motion. I move that the Board of Education consider Ezekiel Gillespie and Maya Angelou as the 2 final names for the renaming of Jefferson Middle School.
Second.
All right.
And now,
Discussion.
yes. So as the maker of this motion, here's where I'm coming from. Over the past 3 years, as the Board of Education has voted to rename several schools, in all of the cases where the Board of Education has renamed a school, they have been named after individuals who have made significant contributions to our local community or state. And those individuals were also trailblazers in accomplishing some of our very firsts. While Eston Hemmings, who then became E.H. Jefferson, does have a direct tie to Madison, Wisconsin. And Eston's mother, Sally Hemmings, also has obvious historical ties to Thomas Jefferson. In my opinion, I don't think that those 2 names tie us in a more progressive stance around really celebrating individuals who have made significant contributions and have accomplished specific things in our state. I also think those 2 names, while interesting and have, kind of an interesting part of our history, I personally feel like they tie us to history in a way that doesn't necessarily align with the way that I've seen our Board of Education vote to rename schools. So as a reminder, Falk Elementary was renamed to Malele Chikasa Nana Elementary School, and she was a pioneer, serving as the first African-American to serve on our school board. She was chosen as the city's first African-American affirmative action officer under Mayor Paul Soglin, and she received many recognitions, including her just lifelong work of writing the Emoja magazine. When Glendale Elementary was renamed to Virginia Henderson Elementary School, Virginia Henderson was a school psychologist from 1976 to 1991. In our district. She then also was a special assistant to the superintendent for equity and diversity. And she continued to consult with the district after her retirement, and her commitment to education and racial justice was unparalleled. And then lastly, when James Madison Memorial High School was renamed to Vel Phillips Memorial High School. We already know that Val Phillips has a long list of firsts on her resume as the first Black woman to graduate from the University of Wisconsin Law School. She was the first female and first Black person elected to the Milwaukee Common Council, the first female judge in Milwaukee County, and the first female and first Black person elected to a statewide office in Wisconsin, becoming the Secretary of State. I put those back in the room today just as a reminder that this board, even though I was not on the board in previous renamings, has made some pretty significant votes to acknowledge folks from our community and state in really positive ways. And so that's the reason I come forward with the two names today, because I feel like they at least get us in the direction of two people that we could consider very accomplished and making significant contributions.
Board Member Castrin.
Yeah, I'd say well said. I tend to agree. I've spent a lot of time looking at how America has attempted to reckon with its history and how we remember certain events in our history. And while I can understand the intentions of wanting to rename the school after one of the descendants of Jefferson, I think when we look into that history, I want us to think more about the form and thoughtfulness and what that uncovers about ourselves and how we deliver that knowledge to particularly young children. And thinking more about the form and intentionality of doing that. I'm thinking about work such as the lynching museum in the South, or the new museum in DC. And I don't think that choosing those two names would be the most thoughtful and intentional manner in which to do so. So I agree with your motion. Thank you.
Any other comments or discussion? Joanna, is there anything that you would like to add, or are we ready for a vote on that?
Oh, yeah.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Joanna, I'm sorry, your advisory vote on that?
Yeah, I approve.
Okay, motion passes 6-0.
6-0, 6-1-0.
Oh, I'm sorry, 6-0, with one recusal. All right. So the next steps again in this process will be a board vote at the end of the month. And the meeting will be held at Jefferson Middle School. Moving on to the next agenda item. It is the 2023-24 budget development and staffing workbooks. And tonight, Ross McPherson is here to give us an update on the state budget outlook. And Cindy Green will walk us through the staffing allocations and workbook processes. So Ross, there will be a pause point after you're done with your presentation, and then we'll do another one on the staffing allocations after Cindy is done with her slides. All right, I'll have you take it away. Thank you.
All right, good evening, everybody. Once again, I'm coming back to operations work group with some good information to say. We have a brief update tonight, as Member Gomez-Schmidt indicated, regarding the state budget outlook, as well as the staffing workbook process. Cindy Green is going to be joining us virtually to work through the staffing workbook slides halfway through the presentation. But I do want to start off all these presentations like we do every month, identifying the goal of our district. Every child is on track to graduate, ready for college, career, and community. The district and every school in it is a place where children, staff, and families thrive, and African-American children and youth excel in school. Our budget planning approach follows the similar cycle it has in previous years. Last month was our kickoff on identification of what we know about the upcoming 23-25 biennial budget process. We are currently in the process of analyzing that information and putting together our internal revenue forecast as well as our expenditure forecast, given the limited information we have. Over the next several weeks and months, we're going to be developing additional information for the board coming back in March, once we have some more concrete data on the state budget, as well as further information about any early approvals for items on the priority action, excellence and equity projects, as well as any preliminary data on the presentation we'll have at the operations work. Our objectives tonight is continued discussion and development of the 23-24 budget, including the identification of what known factors exist, as well as economic factors that are coming to light. And in the second half, we're going to be going through the school level staffing plan overview. Our budget timeline, we are in February, which identifies, as we just stated, the state budget outlook. This is a year in which we're going to be going into a new state biennium budget. So information is very limited. In previous off years, we would be going into the second year of a biennial budget process with some better known information so we can better plan for these discussions.
Thank you.
Our goals and guiding principles are the same as presented last month. I've been working with the board or the committee chair on some identification of language on these. If these are to be updated as we move through the budgetary process. So I won't repeat them here tonight. I do want to get to some of the analytical information about the state budget at this point. This is a slide we've seen before, but I do need to bring it up because this is still the most up-to-date information we have. The DPI budget request was made at the end of last year, identifying an unprecedented increase in the per pupil amount under the state revenue limit. For the fiscal 23-24, the per pupil adjustment is proposed to be $350 per pupil, and in 24-25, $650. For reference, the per pupil adjustment has never been above $300 since the beginning of revenue limits in 1993. There are some similar proposals in the outlook that we have seen before in biennial budget presentations, namely to count 4K students as full day students if they're in a full day program. At the moment, we're required to count all 4K students regardless of programming as 0.6 or 60% of a full-time equivalency. The departmental request also included a significant increase to state general aids. I do want to highlight again that these aid increases do not represent more funding for school districts directly. These are all formatted to go within the revenue caps as they are presented to school districts at large. There's an additional proposal to increase per pupil categorical aid of $24 per pupil and $45 per pupil in the 24 and 25 fiscal years. An increase to special education categorical aid reimbursement to 45% in 23-24, 60% in 24-25. For reference, the current aid reimbursement level is hovering around 30%. It has been there for at least the last decade or more. The bilingual categorical aid reimbursement is proposed to be 15% for 23-24 and 20% in 24-25. Again, for reference, the categorical aid for those programs has been hovering between 8 and 9% for over a decade. We anticipate the governor to respond to the DPI budgetary request later this month. Statutorily, I believe he is required to give us a revised or updated presentation on all departmental requests by February 15th. And of course, today is the 13th. The revenue forecast, as we just went through, this chart focuses purely on the per pupil adjustment and the revenue limit calculation itself. This is a historical view of the per pupil adjustment since the beginning of revenue limits in 1993. As you can see up through the dip in the graph for the 11-12 school year, which was the enactment of Act 10, the increase in the revenue limit was fairly consistent and indexed to inflation, at least by design. Since that time, the change in the revenue limit has been very chaotic and has become an unreliable measure of how school districts are to operate year over year. This is why in the last decade or more, over 75% of all school districts in Wisconsin have gone to an operating referendum. Another view of the same information when we talk about how our revenue limit in MMSD changes from year to year compared to the consumer price index. This chart specifically shows our percentage change in our annual revenue limit, which is the orange bar on this graph. And the blue line is the consumer price index since the 12-13 school year. You'll notice that for the most part, up through the 21-22 school year, The change in our revenue limit and the change in CPI has been relatively consistent. There's still some variation based on the year. But I also want to highlight that this district has been working under operating referendums since the 16-17 school year. If those referendums had not taken place or if they had not been approved, those orange lines would be below the blue line in every situation. Looking towards the current year, 22-23, which we've talked about at length in this group, the change in our revenue limit was hovering around 1% for the development of this budget. And CPI, of course, what came in at its highest in over 40 years at 4.7%. For the upcoming school year, 23-24, we have a lot of unknowns. We just went through the DPI budget proposal, but the what ifs in that situation are the highest stakes we've ever had in K-12 in this area. Namely, CPI is now about 8% based on published data from the WERC. And the difference between a status quo budget where we might see another zero the revenue limit change per pupil and the initial request from the DPI at $350 per pupil is identified in the dotted gray line on the end of this chart. In any situation, I do want to highlight that the difference between a status quo state budget at $0 per pupil on the revenue limit and maximum CPI is a gap of approximately $30 million for this district. Which brings us to what do the actual numbers do in this situation? This is a very high level chart extrapolated based on what we understand and how we calculate base wage in the district. And what this is identifying is, given what we saw on the previous slide on changes to our revenue limit and what we know we have as our current staffing plan, what this chart shows is under two different conditions, a 0-0 budget for 23-25 or the DPI proposal, 350-650, what types of variances are we looking at going into the 23-24 budget development? In any box you look at on this chart, the important factor is the identification of how we establish this budget is going to involve significant strategic budgetary realignment out of this group and the administration in order to sustain operations. Which brings us to, again, a slide we saw last month, but bears repeating just for the sake of discussion. The revenue limit impact that we're seeing in this area is heavily reliant on the experience we've had to our enrollment since the beginning of COVID. This district has seen a significant reduction in enrollment, as many other districts have in the area, but Madison is certainly one that seems more pronounced. As we navigate that going forward, we have to remind ourselves that the primary vehicle in which school districts are funded in the state of Wisconsin is based on enrollment. As our enrollment continues to decline, the formula will produce lower and lower annual revenue changes. This, combined with my favorite two words in this presentation, the hold harmless exemption, continues to apply downward pressure and erode our base revenue authority from year to year. If our enrollment begins to stabilize, and I do say if, because we know we have projections from APL group from December indicating we're going to lose even more over the next 5 years, the erosion of our revenue limit will continue. And as a reminder, we have only 1 year remaining on our current operating referendum scheduled for this coming year. Even with that in place, we're looking at these scenarios indicated on this chart. Again, from last month, I just want to reiterate, this is a 5-year chart of the high level factors of the revenue limit we calculate each year. At the far right are the two scenarios we've highlighted a few times in this presentation. The first gray area before the end of the chart identifies what happens if we get $0 per pupil in the first year of the state budget. And the second set is if we do get the DPI request of $350 per pupil. The important factor here at the bottom of these charts is the revenue limit under a 0 per pupil change will only result in approximately a $2 million change in our revenue limit. And even if we get the DPI request at $350 per pupil, the total revenue limit will move only about $8 million, $8.5 million. Excuse me. Below that chart, there's a couple of percentages to pay attention to. Our change in annual revenue limit, which is what I charted on the previous slide with the line charts comparing CPI and average change in revenue limit, shows that the change is about 0.5%, just shy of 0.6% under a status quo $0 per pupil budget. And under a $350 per pupil budget, the revenue limit will only move about 2.25%. Again, for reference, if the current operating referendum were not in place, would the change in the revenue limit be? I do want to identify at the very bottom there that if we had another 0 budget in 23-24, our revenue limit would be going down over 2% for next year. we get the $350 per pupil and the what if revenue limit, or I'm sorry, referendum were not there, the revenue will be going down almost 0.5%. So that brings us to our budgetary strategy as we go over the next several weeks.
Ross, can I just interrupt everyone for a minute?
Sure.
Here, so I just want to make sure I highlight, we get a 0%. Right? Again, it could really, this is layman's term, be catastrophic.
Absolutely.
Okay, even if we get, we want to make sure I remind us, we never received over 300,
Correct.
right? And it's a proposal for 350. Even with the 350, I want everybody to just take that in and see what that looks like with the 350. Never gotten over 300. In my experience, you never get everything you ask for. So I don't want us to get overly excited in the community or us all together, because that almost never happens. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure those 2 points, because those are significant as we go forward trying to figure all this out.
So our strategy for 23-24, this is where we find ourselves. This is a format we've used in the past to outline the high level factors. So I want to start at the far left. Back in September, we voted to increase the wages for hourly staff by $5 an hour. And in doing so, the 22-23 budget was created an additional revenue gap of about $7 million. We have to remind ourselves that this is still in place as we go and develop for 23-24. We are actively still working to do realignment around that fact, but we can't forget that it's still there. In the middle, I've identified that the revenue limit forecast from the previous slide is going to be anywhere between $2 and $8 million, depending on if we get a zero budget again or if we get the 350. Below that are some of the big rocks, as we tend to call them, on how it's developed, namely our salary and wage plan. In order to move the district forward as in its current state, we're looking at a change in average salaries between about $5.6 million over $24 million, depending on where we decide to land on base wage as a district. In addition to that, we know we have negotiated caps on healthcare funding about 3.5% for next year. At this point, we're not bringing forward any numbers for excellence and equity projects. If we bring that back to the board in March, I should say when we bring that back to the board in March, we're going to be discussing activities primarily on ESSER and one-time funding, because that's the only source of funding we have to work with. And finally, required allowances, we have approximately $1 million identified at this point for inflationary items outside of the staffing plan. So what can we do to start to address some of these large numbers? We have a lot of the same tools we've had in years past. The issue is we've never dealt with numbers this large. We're going to have to look again at district-wide accounts, contracts, utilities, partnerships, a lot of the big areas that we have a chance of addressing. We have to look at our staffing and workbook alignment process, especially in light of continued declining enrollment as a district. We're going to have to do even more realignment of central office departments and staffing. And finally, as we navigate straight into 23-24, I do need to highlight that we've hit a point in budget development where we're going to be forced into using or identifying one-time sources of revenue to continue operations as we know them. Up to this point, we've been able to avoid this discussion, but considering where the state budgets have landed us in the last couple of years, we're almost being forced into this mode. The federal ESSER awards were about over $70 million given to the district in a 2 to 3 year time span, and spending of those dollars is a use it or lose it situation. So we need to start identifying how we can properly use those funds before those grants expire. And then finally, if we're unable to get there using ESSER alone, we're going to have to entertain the use of fund balance. This goes against, budgeting 101. I was taught years ago, but I also never thought school finance would look like this when I started back in the early 2000s. So, next steps for planning. I want to say it again. Identification of the conditions of K-12 funding in the last 10 years has to remain part of our budgetary discussions and necessary realignment. Even if we get everything in the DPI proposal, it's not going to address what we know already is declining enrollment in this district and continued declining enrollment over the next couple of years. Not to mention the highest inflation that anyone in this room has encountered in 40 years. Again, the current school funding model is predicated on the idea of revenue limits, what we used to call the qualified economic offer, and 2/3 funding from the state, the traditional three-legged stool. Only one of those legs is left in that stool, and that's the revenue limit. And the revenue limit is now being used to move revenues down for all school districts across the state. Districts across the state, including all the practitioners I talked to across the state, are anticipated to continue use or start use of one-time money to sustain operations for existing services. Our work over the next couple of months is going to require realignment, as I've said many times tonight, from presentations and information that the superintendent and I are going to bring back to this group, as well as internal work we know have to do with our senior leadership team and cabinet. And then by next month, I should have an update for everyone based on what we know the governor owes us for the identification of his response to the DPI request, as hopefully as well as some of the information around what's going to be done around the state surplus and the state budget in general. So with that, I'll open up for our discussion and break until we switch over to staffing workbooks.
Can I ask one question? You just explained the governor timeline. What is the anticipated timeline for the legislature to actually approve the budget so we would know what we're working for?
Historically, and by that I mean going back almost a decade, the Joint Finance Committee has to address all of the requests from state departments and organizations in conjunction with the governor's recommendation to come up with a final state budget for the governor to sign. The last 6 or so budget cycles, that has been a very prolonged process. I'd like to say it isn't political, but it has certainly become that. I certainly don't anticipate having an approved budget, or I'm sorry, having a budget for the governor to sign before summer. That has been the mode for the last several cycles.
Okay. I'm just thinking that makes it very difficult for school districts to pass their budgets by the end of June. I mean, we have to pass the preliminary budget to start operating, correct?
Well, yes, I mean, at a bare minimum, we could pass a continuing resolution without an actual budget. I'm gonna be working on a budget. But at bare minimum, statutorily, we have to pass a continuing resolution so we can pay bills past July 1st.
Right.
We go a bit further by identifying a more detailed budget to work with. The trick here is the revenue gap is a big unknown.
Okay. Thank you, Ross. I guess I'd like to go around and see what questions everybody has. Board Member Nichols, can we start and go this way around?
Absolutely, Chair. Thank you, Ross, for always just a comprehensive overview of kind of our reality. I just have a few questions. So one is for the slide where you had the gap closing strategies. I know that that's a variety of things that are being reviewed, I'm sure simultaneously. But is there like a timeline or kind of a maximum date that we would be looking at? I don't know, some of those on here. So like, for instance, you're saying you're looking at district-wide accounts, staffing and workbook alignment, which I think the workbook alignment is happening now. The realignment of central office department budgets and staffing, ESSER one-time funding, use of fund balance. Like, are those, all of those going to be kind of deployed as a process to narrow the gap coming up towards like April? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, it's going to be, I mean, it has been an ongoing discussion for some time. The reason we're not going through that list in detail is in large part because it could be involving a decision around someone's job.
Yeah.
And we don't want to put that information up for discussion, as that could get us into some hot legal waters around all that, most notably. But we are going to be working on that as an administrative group to put costs behind some of that, to make sure that we're ready to execute on those before anything is brought forward for a vote in the April budget plan.
Okay, so the timeline is basically up now through up till April.
Ongoing, yep.
Okay, got it. Then the follow-up question I have is related to the equity and excellence kind of focused priorities. We have had some pretty amazing investments in our equity and excellence kind of initiatives. And I guess I'm wondering, will there be an opportunity for the board to maybe indicate preferences of things that we would like to see make it? Or will administration, Dr. Jenkins, will you be coming forward with kind of the critical thinking that you all have done around that?
We'll be sure, and I know Ms. Green is ready to just jump in here, but let me just say this first. Definitely, we'll come back. This is a collaboration. These are around our priorities. You set priorities, and we work within those, and even in looking at some of our equity and excellence as well, projects that we have. But no, we would not go forward without that coming back and being a conversation as to how we get there. That's the part of that whole strategic budgetary roadmap.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Ms. Green, I didn't know if you need to add into that as well. Okay,
Okay.
I read the script.
I don't know if Ms. Green is still sick this week, but you're looking better, Cindy. More well. That's what I mean. That's what I mean. Okay, the last question is related to the ESSER funding. Okay, so you did share with the board that I believe this is correct, that the ESSER funding, we have like a $29 million balance of what was originally allocated to us or given to us. Is that correct?
At present, yes.
That's
I shared materials in last week's weekly update to that effect, with many items on that list still committed for future spending between now and the end of those awards.
right. So out of the 29 million, how much is committed and how much might be available in the gap closing strategy? If you could just say off the top of your head.
It's a little early for that, but I will say we always had money set aside for the tail of ESSER funding for commitments we made in the ESSER plan last year.
Mhm.
But based on where spending is currently and where we find ourselves, we're looking at approximately $12 to $16 million for the awards.
12 to 16 of the 29 are committed.
Between the ESSER 2 and 3 awards and the end of those awards, there's about 16 uncommitted after that schedule that was presented.
Got it. Okay. Thank you so much. Chair, I think that concludes all I have right now.
All right, thanks. Board Member Pearson, I see your hand. You,
That was like prior before you decided to do round robin. So
I apologize.
I'll just wait.
Okay, Board Member Simkin.
Thank you. Ross and Dr. Jenkins, I think my questions are very similar to Board Member Nichols around the timeline for getting recommendations. And so I guess I'm wondering around, like, what is the process that you would like to see us go through? There's going to be this back and forth between the board and what the administration is recommending for cuts. And so I'm trying to wrap my head around how we do that between April and June.
So sorry, go ahead.
So are you coming back to us at the April operations meeting? And what exactly do you plan to have at that point?
So in the past, when we put together the first round of the budget book, there are sections in there that identify our excellence and equity projects, our budgetary realignment pages, as well as our staffing plan. And in the section that had, now the name escapes me, our required allowances and our budgetary realignment pieces, we list out, we don't name names, we list out the items that were either reduced or reallocated within the budget for discussion. At that time, after the April that process with the public and the board, in which case we could explore some of those items further. By the time we get to that point, Dr. Jenkins and I are going to have to start to make some of those changes for that book. And short of reinstating some of those items, if we do get better information on a state budget, we're going to have to come as cuts up front. Does that make sense?
It does. So I guess I'm wondering, because this feels like this is historical. That we're,
It is.
would it be helpful to have a conversation prior to that where we talk about the direction that you're looking at for those cuts? So that we can start by trying to align what the board is is gonna be interested in with what the administration is gonna come to us with? It's sort of like a pre-step, or do we have enough time? I guess I'm wondering is because this is so big, are we gonna have enough time if you come to us with this really well-researched plan? And then the board says, well, we were kind of hoping you were going in a different direction. Do we have enough time to?
That hasn't typically done changes in the past, but if there was items that we needed to bring back, I mean, before we approve a budget in June, preliminary budget, we'll have the opportunity to take any and all feedback about that first go. But the April one is going to be our first presentation of what reductions are coming through in the budget. So I mean, part of the conversation would be in the operations work groups or the board meetings themselves. But after that point, we have our feedback process on our website through Let's Talk. And if we need to have other conversations, we certainly can.
I guess I'm just wondering because of if we're talking about potentially eliminating, programs or large pieces of really good stuff that we're doing. Does it feel like it would be useful for you to come to us beforehand with what you're calculating? So that we can say, yes, please continue to calculate what that's going to look like. Or please don't touch this.
The implications of bringing something like a large scale, again, this is theoretical, but bringing a large scale cut like that and then having no in front of that would significantly impede our ability to administer those cuts. So I guess if we're asking for a list of items with up or down vote, I would have trouble figuring out how to facilitate that in time for some of the reductions I know we need to make.
Right, and because of that time crunch that I feel like we're going to be getting into, that's why I'm wondering if you wanted to come to us beforehand, even just to give us an idea of what you're calculating. Because right now we don't know which programs you're looking at reducing.
Right. We can certainly continue to have that discussion. I don't think I have a good answer at this moment.
Yeah, I would just say, as Ross has stated, historically, this is the way that we've had an opportunity to work through this. And it's a lot going up into just identifying the areas that we already know. We're trying to get the return on investment. I love last meeting when we talked about, we have some things that are not working. That's why we're here to really look at some of those things, and then when we come forward, you'll say, yes, those are some things we should have taken off. The timeline gets real tight between April and June for us as well. And so I think you did answer very well in terms of if it throws that whole piece off. I mean, and I'm very afraid, I get scared about the June end of the year, making sure we have a budget for you. So, but we could definitely keep talking about where we are and keep one another informed like that. We'll talk about more than board officers meeting, I think. It'll help us all in doing this. But for the most part, like what said, I think it makes it a better timeline for us trying to get to the park. You're puzzled.
I am puzzled, but
Yes.
Clarification.
Yeah, can I just
Sorry.
clarify? I know board member Gomez Schmidt, you trying to do a round robin. I think where Laura, board member Simpkin is going which was part of my question too, which is, and I know that this is tricky. Departments are now doing their own assessment, right? Of like what you really need to hang on to. What is the staffing that's attached to that? Who are the community partners attached to that? Like, I get it. Like there's a lot of pieces. And I think where board member Simpkin is going is in a sensitive way, would there be an opportunity to potentially see the early list of what might be cut? And I don't know if that's possible in a public forum without that having a domino effect on people who may be attached to those programs. But I think the dilemma is if we get the list later and then there was a board member who was like, no, don't cut that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do you, I think that's what I'm hearing in the question.
Yeah, I hear a question too. I just want, it's a quantitative side of it and it's a human side of it.
Yeah.
And in that it's very confidential. When we come out with it, it's public, it is what it is at that point. But then the human side is gonna take over in the process. And I'll just leave it right there. As I've gone through it, this cutting like this, as you mentioned, historic. This is very historic. Strategic budgetary realignment. There are gonna be some things that we have tough decisions on. There will be some hurting. I'll just put it like that.
Right, and with an awareness of that and an awareness of, not wanting to alarm people, I think what Board Member Nichols was saying was perhaps more clear than what I was saying, which is I think it would help us to just know what you're targeting before you do all the work to come up with, these really complex numbers. And then we get to a point where we're at a crunch and we can't pivot at that point. So if there's a way to get some of that information, soon, I think that would probably make the rest of the process go more smoothly, because we'll know that the board and the administration are in the same direction for those cuts.
I'll just say I hear your question. It's very complex. Seems simple, but way more complex.
Yeah.
Let's do it up a little bit, talk to the team, and let's come back and have a little bit more discussion. We'll be all about it.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, please go out of them.
Yeah, so we have one more out of order and then we're gonna go back to the round robin. Are you done with your questions or can?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm sorry, Laura, did I cut you off? That was not what I intended.
I'm done.
Board Member Vandermeulen, one quick comment that relates to the.
Yes, it is.
discussion. Okay.
I formally request that for next month, it be added to the agenda that we did come back and discuss where the cuts are going to be. This is an open and transparent process. It needs to be. The worst thing we could do is to give false hope or to have people wait without knowing. They have a right to know what their future is going to be and a right to look for other jobs if that future is not able to be sustained here. This is the board's budget. As much as I appreciate and respect the administration, this is something I think the board needs to have another meeting on. And I think it needs to be so that people realize the seriousness of this. I respect absolutely everyone. And Ross, anyone who can put up with me this long, I gotta say, congrats, I'm not the easiest person to begin with. However, your work needs to be showcased to begin with. But two, we have to make it clear that these are people's lives and they need to know where those cuts are going to be so they can decide what is important to them and what is important to those families. If that is possible to be added to the work group for the next month, that would be wonderful. We do it like the third week of March.
We're going to continue to get budget updates as we progress through this process. I think the one thing I would warn us is really trying to figure out what the board role is and what the administration role is here, right? I don't feel that it is our job to dive in to the budget to the extent where we are deciding position by position what gets cut and what doesn't, right? Our administration is tasked with making some very difficult decisions. And what I would not want to do is rush us to the point where we don't have the analysis that we need to make sure we are doing this correctly. I am with you on the urgency of wanting to figure this out sooner rather than later. But I do want it to come to the board in a fashion that is ready for that analysis is done completely.
May I add an addendum? It's a one-sentence addendum.
Yes, one sentence.
First of all, always tell a lawyer to add a comma, otherwise their sentences take forever, but comma. But here is what I suggest. One, we need an equity chart. Two, we need to know what areas, large areas the cuts are coming from. If we're not doing the other, then we at least need that information. I know we've asked for an equity chart a couple of times and have not seen one, and I can't make those decisions. And the board, I'm not taking anything away from the administration, but the board needs to be able to see where those lie. And I think equity, if we're going to put it at the forefront, we need to see the equity charts.
And yes,
And
I'm
comma
gonna
at
move on
period.
to, yep, I'm gonna move on to Board Member Castro. We'll get you on.
No, I'm good.
On the backside. I just wanted to say again that there's a balance between transparency and a balance, with trying to do the work we need to do too. So yes. Board Member Castro.
Thank you. First of all, when we look at some of the staffing book reallocations that we're gonna see some transparent cuts that we make. We will be cutting FTE positions, and which positions those will be decided by principals as it should be. Just as it is with the departments, by the department chairs as it should be. All right, so one question for you, Ross, is you mentioned that we might have to start using fund balance. Want to be as responsible with that as possible, because that then creates a structural deficit if it's reoccurring expenses. In your experience and expertise, what is the best responsible way to address that deficit in the long run? We don't add to it, right? So if we make a deficit this year, how do we start to attack it in the following years?
I would say academically and historically, the use of one-time money for operational resources goes against the base teachings I've known for years. How you do that responsibly, though, is you need to start to taper off so that you show a change in your structural deficit decreases each year. At this point, without better state information, I can't show you what that taper is going to look like. At this point, we have so much one-time money being injected into K-12 that I believe we're basically being backed into a corner to do exactly that, to use one-time money to sustain operations for at least 1 to 2 years. Thankfully, we've had budgets in the last 5 to 10 years that has shown some margin, not due to errors in the budget per se, but due to outperforming the budgets we've brought forward year over year. Going through COVID certainly addressed or increased that even further. There were some things that as a district, we simply couldn't do because of the whole thing. As we're looking to next year, we do have ESSER money we have to spend. If that goes to operations, so be it. If that goes to other projects and we cut deeper elsewhere, again, so be it. But the use of fund balance and how we address fund balance going forward, whether that be through policy revision or not, is going to require us to use that money in a way that follows the revenue authority the state has given us. And I don't like what the state has given us the last couple of years. Even though declining enrollment is a local issue for us right now, we can't change the funding plan. We find ourselves in the situations on those slides I had earlier where our revenue limit is going up less than 1%. That means things in our budget cannot move more than 1%. Historically, we've not done that or had to do that around here because our changes in revenue limit has exceeded the cost of living changes each year. We're no longer in that situation. So we have to at least consider following the hand we're dealt.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I think that will be a multi-year discussion with how we close that structural gap. And just to be abundantly clear here, we're talking about a reduction in services from the district.
Right.
What we're talking about. And hopefully we find areas that we can reduce where community partners can fill in the gap. But in terms of education being a community endeavor, we need the community to step up. I'm done.
Board Member Pearson, Vice President Pearson.
Yeah, so my question is, I know that the city of the annex parts of the town of Madison.
Yes.
And specifically on the south side where it's like on the cusp of like McFarland and Fitchburg and such, that area has got divvied up, correct? You know, so some of those students now go to Verona, some of those students now go to Oregon and Madison. Do we know like how significant that impacts us as a district?
I don't, and I have to be honest, to my knowledge, the annexation or the dissolvement of the town of Madison should have only affected the city of Madison itself. I'm not aware of an attendance boundary change that would impact us.
None that would have impacted us directly. Okay. And I just asked that because I know like as we're talking about, you know, decline enrollment and such, and you know, that area is a large area with a lot of children. So that was my first question. My second question is that I know and this goes back to Nichelle and somewhat Laura's question, just about we asked last summer, or we all talked about the stop-do list last summer. And we asked again about it in October. And now we're here like in winter and the spring. I think we asked about it maybe in January too, or I might have asked about it. When will we get that?
For which year?
Or just, I mean, we haven't had one yet, so like a complete one.
The stop do last 22-23 was in the budget book.
It's in the budget book, but the new one for this coming, like this year.
No, because we're still developing that. It would be in the April budget presentation as we talked about.
Okay. So with that, I'm also in agreement, like getting that kind of as we're going through the talks as much already available, so that we can have like more full on discussions about that would be great. Because I agree with what has been said here and what Savian just mentioned, like this is something that is going to impact like our families tremendously and our scholars tremendously. And unfortunately, it's decisions that we have to make. But I guess my comment then is very similar to Savian's comment. At the end of the day, we're going to have our community step up and have our partners step in to help in some ways, because it is going to be very difficult. But I just really wanted to reiterate what Savian said, because I don't know if the community knows like how difficult this will be in the next coming years. Especially even if we were to get, somewhat at a zero even amount, if that's even possible. So that's all I was just that's my only questions.
Thank you so much, Board Chair Gomez Schmidt. Thank you, Ross, and your department for this presentation tonight and for all the information you've given us up to this conversation. I want to caution my fellow board members not to incite a sense of panic in our immediate community. I think that the word cut translates to the word layoff very, very frequently. And I think the problem with talking about a layoff is that we can't staff our current budget. We all know that we have worked down a significant number of positions in every area of this district. And so if we're making people feel like they may or may not have a job when they're already working understaffed, I think we're exacerbating an issue that we know exists and we need to be mindful of. The other thing I want to say about that is that there is a financial reality of the staffing shortage. And so my first question, Ross, is what do you anticipate our fund balance will be at the end of this year?
So if you recall in the budget book, we anticipated a number of one-time spending sources with assigned fund balance, as well as addressing the structural deficit we had generated back in September during our final budget development for 22-23. So we were scheduled to decrease fund balance approximately $20+ million. We are currently on pace to outperform that measure. And while we still do have a number of vacant positions that are generating savings throughout, we're currently looking at trying to get that as close to a zero change to fund balance this year as possible. It's still a little early to project out for year-end performance, as we have a lot of orders that are going to be coming before the board and consent between now and the end of June that will hit this fiscal year. But I'm hopeful that we're not going to be adding significant fund balance this year.
When you take into consideration the decline in enrollment, and the biggest informant in the decline in enrollment is birth rates, and the lowest birth rate was 2019. Those are students who will be entering 4K in kindergarten in the next couple of years. So some of the smallest classes of students we've seen since 1987. When you look at about the 5% loss in enrollment that we've seen, and then you look at kind of right sizing the district in terms of teachers, is there a relationship right now between kind of where we're at in staffing and our ability to be short-staffed and maintain our classroom size and our loss of enrollment in terms of right sizing the district? Is there an alignment between the decline in students and the shortage of staff that we can use to our advantage in this upcoming budget? And I'm sorry, I don't think that's the best way to ask that question, but I think you
It
know.
was a lot, but I'll try.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So, I mean, one thing that Cindy's gonna address in the next couple of slides too, is when we did the workbooks this year, we obviously had to address the impacts of declining enrollment in our new enrollment projections when we developed the workbooks this year. Yes, that's easy to inform things like classroom size to make sure that we're maintaining staffing that reflects the students in our buildings. But you'll also see in the slides that our ratios between adults in the building, students, is actually still shrinking slightly. So I guess to say it as lightly as possible, we could have gone further in some ways, and we chose not to. Because there are certain service levels we don't want to address at this point. We may have to in future cycles. But it is something where, yes, our classroom can be informed by enrollment, but certain service levels, it's hard to go after those service levels and have a good argument.
The other thing I think we have to talk about in this budget is areas of inefficiency. I think when you talk about cuts, you're talking as if we are operating at the absolute most efficient way that we could possibly ever be operating. And I don't believe that we are. And so I think that there are cuts that we can make that are strategic and intelligent and not necessarily harmful. And I think that we have to be able to have that conversation. The other thing I want to say is we have to be able to talk about both long-term and short-term in terms of this budget. And so looking to sustainable solutions, things that we might want to invest one-time dollars in because they are one-time expenses, and things that will be a return on investment in the long term. Things like solar panels, things that address what we spend for energy and how our district generates energy are things I think we should talk about. I don't think we need to get into that in depth tonight, but it's an area I want us to think about. The last thing I want to say is, Cindy, I want to thank you for your participation in this conversation. We talk about the essential services that our students need. I think that you're really important to this conversation. This is not just numbers and figures. These are our children, you know? And so one of the things I've talked about a lot is mixed age classrooms, both from a budgetary standpoint and from an effective instruction strategy. Particularly when we see kids coming back from the pandemic with a lot of variety in terms of where they're at, and normalizing that our kids learn in different ways at different paces, no matter what their age is. Ross, when I talked about this a couple of years ago, you said that is a $2 million solution for a $20 million problem. And I respect that still. But I bring it up to say, Cindy, what are the instructional factors that you really want this board to think about in consideration of this budget?
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Sound great, Cindy.
Okay, yes, 95% there. Yeah, there's a few things that I want to make sure that we take into consideration. And I think that you will see in the slides that I'm going to present shortly that we have taken into consideration. Multi-age from an instructional design standpoint is not something that you will see reflected currently in next year's kind of workbook process. It is something that we have begun to discuss internally, and have said that if this is the way we want to go as a system, we need a few years to really plan that effectively. So Board President Muldrow, when you talk about short-term versus long-term, that definitely needs to be part of the long-term. When we think about the new materials and the curriculum we just purchased, they truly are identified for grade level appropriateness. So we would want to spend time doing some deconstruction and really thinking about what that looks like. We want that to be an instructional design approach, not a budgetary approach, right? If that is the way we want to move forward as a system, we want it to be thoughtful and we want it to be led by instruction. So I will say that. I will say that literacy, again, regardless of what grade level it is, has got to be a significant priority. That means in terms of how we're thinking about some of our interventionists, that's how we're thinking about our core classrooms at the secondary level. That's how we're thinking about our course offerings. The ideas that we've talked about in terms of advanced coursework and ensuring that our students are leaving with college credit and industry certification are things that we believe have to be front and center when we're thinking about the staffing and workbook components as well. The last thing I will say that you'll also see in the slides that we are trying to continue to focus on and also become more robust in is world language at the middle school. We know that one is a credit-bearing opportunity for students for high school, and we want to continue to grow in what our students have access to. Most schools right now only offer Spanish and French. We really want to think about what those course offerings in the area of world language could look like, but that is something that we have preserved. And then AVID, back to the literacy piece, we've talked a lot about AVID as a key strategy in the district that actually has produced outcomes. And so AVID is something else that you will see that we have maintained. And also I'll talk a little more about that in the workbook. That's just a few highlights. I'll pause to see what questions you may have.
Cindy, I really appreciate you speaking to kind of the long-term strategy and short-term strategy and really kind of flushing out for us what some of this looks like from an instruction standpoint. I will say, I think that we have to be ready to have a complex question, a complex conversation about what it means to serve our students well. And I also think we have to be reflective in terms of the investments we've made over the course of the last 3 years strategically. Usually less students means less teachers, right? That is, you have less students, you don't need as many people, you don't need as many classrooms. This board has made decisions over the course of the last few years to say, actually, we don't want to reduce the amount of support our students have because they are surviving a pandemic, and we want our young people to have as many educators and adults to support them in their learning as possible. I think at this point, we're going to have to identify strategically what we mean by that and what we want that to look like. And so I'm really looking to you, Cindy, for your leadership, Dr. Jenkins for your leadership, and Ross for your leadership on how we maintain the integrity of our services and find inefficiencies in our budget and address them. That's it for my questions.
Thank you. Board Member Vandermeulen.
I already asked mine.
Oh, okay.
That was it.
All right. I guess I will, I have just a couple of questions based on the conversation that is happening tonight. And I guess one of the comments that I have written down is exactly what Dr. Jenkins said, is that best case scenario, if the legislature approves the $350 per pupil increase, that is DPI's proposal. And with the factors including our final year of the 2020 operating referendum and the declining enrollment, we have a maximum of 2.2% increase in the revenue limit. Maximum. And that's best case scenario. And so I also don't want to cause panic as we're moving through this process. This is going to be a very difficult budget cycle. But we have tools to work with, and that is sort of the point of us moving through this month by month budget process and making decisions along the way. I would say probably the most important tool we have is not to overcommit with additional spending beyond where we're at currently until we know and have more solid information from the state. It's just, that's a really solid strategy, but knowing that's really difficult when we have a historic rate of inflation. It's extremely difficult. I guess my question is, Ross, one of the things that our district invests in every year is our steps and lanes. And that is part of the salary and wage. I guess I'm asking if it's part of the salary and wage plan slide that you showed us. You gave a range. So I would say that, the steps and lanes is average 2% increase for staff. Not all staff get that increase. Some get more than the 2%. That gets added on to whatever base wage we give to all staff. So has the 2.2%, how much would that be for the coming year? And has that already been factored into the budget?
In the first go around for framing of this budget, it was definitely considered in the initial periods, as you saw on the slides. 2.25% if we equate what we typically use as a percent measure on how much a percent costs the district. It's approximately $2.6 million per percentage points. Now, because of what you just mentioned, where some groups, the average is 2%, but the actual variation is above and below that. We typically see anywhere between 5.2 and $5.6 million for all step costs, all in, all units, all funds, all areas. So yes, it was factored into the variances we already looked at. It's certainly something we can continue to discuss if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I guess my question is when we're talking about an increase that we give that affects some staff, but not all staff. And we have another mechanism to give an increase in base wage that affects all staff. Is there a way to take a look for a year and say, we're going to freeze steps and lanes for a year? I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm saying freeze it for a year and make an investment given the historic rate of inflation. I'm just throwing out there as a suggestion. And I don't know if there's any information that you could come back and just show us what that would mean if we were to do something like that.
Certainly. I mean, actually, the impacts would look very similar to the slide that we already showed in terms of the delta. If you look at the delta between the columns on that chart, those would be the same impacts.
Can you show that? I'll let that slide.
Yeah. So on here, every percentage change is showing kind of the difference between those areas. Again, this is extrapolated data, but on average, we're going to see close to about a $2.6 million delta in a percentage change. Because of the way the revenue limit calculates per pupil, it's not going to be an exact match in all situations, but that's why I brought this back up for illustration.
All right, thanks. And then I guess my other thing in learning about budgets over the years and talking about fund balance is that it's not set aside as a rainy day fund. And it's much more about to help us negotiate our budget cycle and to keep our short-term borrowing to a lower rate as we work our way through our budget cycle. The majority of our funding comes to us in January, at the end of January through taxes. Our fiscal year starts in July, and we have to negotiate all of that time with keeping our operations going. And so to have a strong fund balance is important, which is why there's a board policy in place to make sure that it's 10 to 15%. But we were told by the auditors that you should really have 2 months of operating, which at this point, I'm not sure where that lands us percentage wise. And I'm sure it flexes or.
It flexes, and we would say we're currently above that threshold, but your illustration makes a lot of sense. So our fiscal year, yes, runs July 1st to June 30th, and we record fund balance as we are required to do at the end of our fiscal year, saying our fund balance is X% of our operating funds. But we do also borrow over $50 million each year because we essentially are broke at the end of September. If our fiscal year were to go to September 30th, our fund balance would be zero. It's all about when it gets reported.
Right. So just trying to highlight the importance of having a strong fund balance to get us through those short-term borrowings that are need to do to continue the operations of the district. I guess that is all my questions for right now. Is it okay? If it's okay, we'll move on to Cindy's portion of this. We're going to take a look at the staffing workbooks. And Cindy has a presentation for us.
Cindy does, but this is MMSD's work, not Cindy's work, but I'm going to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us.
I am here. Sorry I cannot be there in person. I thought it was better for one more day. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Board Member Gomez-Schmidt. Okay, so I want to spend a little bit of time going through our workbook and our allocation process. And I want to start by talking about the timeline that you see here on this slide. While this timeline shows December through February, the reality is this is work that happens all year long. We started meeting internally in November to begin planning for the 23-24 school year. We come back together in April, right after workbooks are submitted, to begin to monitor enrollment processes and where we need to make adjustments. So just wanted to name that this process really is all year long, but I'll talk through a little bit of what you see in front of you. In December, as you all know, we reset our school workbooks for the following year, based on both maybe 1 year conversions that have been made. We reset to look at our class sizes, and we also reset based on the projected enrollments that we receive. Those projected enrollments we talked about in December with the board that we received from APL. After we do the resetting of our workbooks, we really spend some time looking at kind of the manual adjustments that need to be made based on a few considering factors. We look at schools that are identified as Title I or AGR. We look at schools that may have that federal designation of ATSI. We really pay attention to what might be happening in the area of special education or multilingual. And then we also try to look at populating those workbooks with a +1 or a +2 for optimal class size. We then spend time going through that process for a good month and a half with our associate superintendents of schools, our department leaders, and we make adjustments along the way based on what we know about local context, based on what we know we may need to consider preserving, a lot of what was just talked about in this previous conversation. And then we get to a point where we believe the workbooks are populated to the best of the ability, that now it is the responsibility of that school leader and their local SBLT to really make instructional design decisions that make sense for their school. So that is the step we are in right now. Our workbooks for our schools were released on Friday, February 10th, and they are now in the hands of our principals. They are really thinking about that instructional design. They're using data to make decisions, and they're really working with other thought partners, such as the department content areas, to help think through creative solutions to what they think is going to best meet the needs of their scholars. Can you go to the next slide, please, Ross? Thank you so much. So on this slide, you are going to see similar to what we talked about in December, but with more detail in terms of our enrollment projections that we received from APL. These show the 5-year projections and really show where the enrollment decline is going to happen over the next 5 years. We are seeing that we're potentially going to have up to a decline of over 2,500 students, 10% decline. We know, I think board member Muldrow just mentioned it, birth rates and 4-year-old kindergarten trends are declining. And so we see another area of potential decline over the next 5 years. We know that that is going to just have a effect on middle school and high school as we continue. So at middle school, we're going to be seeing another decline of over 1,200 students. And as those middle school babies matriculate up into middle school, we will see a decline there, and high school as well. So what you are noticing is you'll see where we are projected for next year. In a few slides later, I'm going to show you what that looks like in terms of our workbooks and the allocation provided to schools. But you will also see in terms of where we plan to be in 5 years from now and that year-to-year change. Next slide, please, Ross. So this gets into that level of detail of what does that mean for this upcoming school year and how are we thinking about staffing at the school level. It is important for us to try and protect the classroom as much as possible. We have all talked about that before in terms of the priority is ensuring that students and those closest to students are protected the most. And simultaneously, we have to make adjustments based on our enrollment projections. The reality is our student enrollment is going down. And so with that, we are making adjustments to align with our projected enrollments. You will see here on this slide where we were this school year in terms of our allocation and what we are projecting for next year. You will notice at the elementary level, it's staying pretty stable. You will notice at the middle school level, we have what I would consider a slight decline, and then a little more significant decline at high school, or a higher decline at high school. It's important to note that for our high schools, this does not include our innovative and alternative education program. They do not receive a workbook. As a reminder, they are part of our central office department. So that allocation and how they are staffed happens through the central office work. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you, Ross. This next slide outlines what our board policy is. I think you are all very familiar with this, and how we made decisions about when we were populating the workbook, trying to stay within that optimum line or that optimum column, and either a +1 or a +2 when we were trying to make decisions. We really use this as part of our formula when making the workbook populations. We use our class size to really try and focus on where class size can stay below maximum. Next slide, please. So what happened with this process that now is at the school level? We tried, as I said before, to make as many intentional decisions to hold on to allocation that was closest to our students. We did have to make some realignment in order to really think about continuing to focus on instruction and student emotional mental health. But with that, we were able to add 4 full-day 4K sections. So we're excited to be able to hold on to that because we know that is a district priority. We really were trying to target kindergarten as first grade at our AGR schools and try and hold that to 19 per section. We know those early grades are so important. It also really focuses on our investment in early literacy. At the other schools, we tried to, at kindergarten and first grade, hold on to 22 per section when possible. And then overall, we tried to make sure that we did not have policy maximums, if at all avoidable. We also have a process in place that will start in April where we will begin to watch enrollments. And as we see enrollment changes, either up or down, we are going to make allocation decisions based on that. So we do have a few sections that are under the class size minimum also due to we had no other decisions for that. And those will also be on our watch list as we start that process in April. Next slide, please, Ross. So at middle school and at high school level, it's a little different in terms of how we do our staffing. We have a formula that we use that also includes what we call a capacity factor. And with that, at middle school, we try to stay at the rate of 23 per section for a ratio of student 23:1. And as I mentioned previously, we really wanted to maintain the approach we have to focus on daily world language at the middle school level in order to ensure all students, regardless of what middle school, can earn high school credit by taking world language. That was definitely a priority that we wanted to hold on to. At the high school level, we focused on at maximum 29 per section. We definitely had some outliers, and we have certain classes that may be over 30. Usually those are some of our classes such as physical education or classes similar to that. We definitely wanted to also provide flexibility to our principals to make decisions about their instructional design and their school needs. So they have flexibility in thinking about their college and career readiness areas, such as their pathway learning coordinator, experiential learning liaison, credit recovery, and academic and career planning coordinator. And then to continue with the work that we focused on with AVID that we talked about with the board last year, to continue to grow West and Memorial to have full implementation of AVID, we have done another increase at West and Memorial. So both of those schools will now have 10 sections of avid elective class. The goal is to have 12 sections, 3 sections at every grade level to be at full capacity. Next slide, please. In addition to that, we also have some supplementary staffing for our English learners that we focus on. For English as a second language and our bilingual resource teacher allocation, they remain pretty stable across the district, both for non-bilingual and bilingual environments. There were some changes due to mobility at the elementary level. We definitely are making sure that schools will build in case management time to meet those legal requirements for our English learners. And we also have allocation that's supplemental to the class size teacher allocation. Our BRS allocation, or our bilingual resource specialist allocation, has also remained stable. We use a weighted formula. We look at student proficiency and parent need for translations and or interpretations to make those decisions. We did hit a point where we are at a threshold where we need to add BRS for the Pashto language, which is new this upcoming school year in 23-24. And that was something that was also taken into consideration. Title I funding. So we don't actually receive our Title I funds until after this process has been completed or is like midway through, similar to other budget conversations we just had. But our estimated award is about $5.6 million, and we try to push most of that funding out to our schools. We have to reserve a little for administration, our private parochial, homelessness, etc. $4.85 million goes to our schools. We definitely focus on more direct funding to our higher poverty schools so that we can maintain program integrity, which means we can better serve our students and hopefully have better student outcomes. This upcoming school year, we will have 5 less Title I eligible schools. It will be 3 elementary schools and 2 middle schools. The other thing that we know we have to take into consideration with our title funding is our schools will be able to do less with the dollars they receive due to the increase in some of the staffing, but with a $5 an hour wage increase. We also know supply demands and inflation has also cost more an increase in costs for materials, et cetera. So we're really working with our title schools to think intentionally about what is most important for them to meet their student needs and what is a priority. In addition to that, we really want to have our Title I funding get to a very stable approach and our schools in a stable environment. So we don't have schools going on and off year to year. We don't actually think that that is beneficial for anybody. And so moving into the 24-25 school year, we're going to be really working on a threshold of poverty rate at 40% or higher as those schools that will be eligible for title. And that will all be based on direct cert count. Just a few more slides and then we'll pause for questions. Next slide, please. So here we go with special education. So for special education staffing, we pushed as much allocation out as we could. We really want to focus on hiring early and getting those most qualified candidates. We shifted a portion of the supplemental or our flex allocation to our cross-categorical teacher base this year. We also are keeping allocation included for scholars in need of referrals and additional scholars based on school size and enrollment trends. For our base allocation, we tried as much as possible to ensure that we are holding to FTE in a 1.0 or a 0.5. We know that is ideal for hiring, and so that was the way we approached it. Our flexible allocation was to make 0.5 CC teacher allocation to 1.0 and also provide full-time SEA allocation based on the school level. There is a limited amount of allocation that we will strategically provide to schools between July and September, and that will be based on enrollment changes and or needs of our scholars with an IEP. And as I said before, early hiring for our CC teacher is of utmost importance because we get our highest qualified staff to really support our students that need it, that have an IEP. Next slide, please. So where are we at now and what is next in terms of how our workbooks will continue to be finalized and how we support our schools and making the decisions that are most important to meet the needs of their scholars. We look at this in 3 phases. So we have phase 1, which we have passed. It's all of the pre-work we ask our schools to do with working with us, with working with their SBLT, digging into their data, really thinking about what about their current instructional design is working well and where do they see areas of improvement or areas of change for next year. That happened prior to February 10th. We are now in the phase 2, which is where they have their workbooks now and they work with their analyst in HR and they work with the central office departments to begin to actually populate their workbook, right? They come to a session with their analysts. They have individualized targeted time to really begin to think through what they need at their school and also adhere to the guidance that we put out centrally in terms of where there are some parameters and or expectations to adhere to. And then the last phase happens with their associate superintendent of schools, some others of us in the department, and usually Jennifer Waldner if it is a school that is identified as title. The principal provides a presentation in terms of all of the decisions they made for their workbook, why those decisions were made, what changes they saw, and how they are going to create a communication plan to ensure that all of their stakeholders are aware of their decisions and the plan that they made for their staffing for the following school year. Next slide, please. So our next steps. Ross, you want me to turn it back to you or you want me to go through this one?
Sure, I can come back in here.
I'll turn it back to you.
All right. So this was really designed to kind of bring the 2 discussions back together, identifying that in March, we're going to be coming back about any new information from the governor for us to discuss with the full board. Confirm information around our healthcare designs. Even though we have negotiated rates, we're still going to provide an update from the HR team about the healthcare plans for next year. And then review any excellence and equity project proposals that we might be bringing forward, especially those that might involve early approvals. And then April, we'll release our draft preliminary budget book, or at least our initial budget information. If we don't have reliable information in the first budget, we might need to look at that process a little bit differently, especially considering the variances we've been discussing. But we certainly will have that discussion launched in April. We'll view. May and June, of course, is going to open our community feedback process on the budget book itself and the budget vote in June. And we will continue to make adjustments where needed in preparation for that June vote. And with that, that was it. I'll give back to the chair.
All right. Thank you, Cindy and Ross. I guess.
We'll start with me and go round robin.
Yes, I would like to do it the other way this time. So Nikki,
Certainly.
would you like to start?
I have a question on special education. Are we still following the weighted formula? I don't know if this is a Nancy question or a Cindy question.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think Nancy is on. I'm gonna see if she wants to pop on and yep, there she is.
Hi, Nancy. Yeah, I hear you.
Nancy,
Good
you're on
evening.
mute.
Oh, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Board Member Vandermeulen, for your question. So in calculating the allocation for special education teachers, CC teachers, and special education assistants for the 2023-24 school year, we did continue to use the weighted formula, but we looked at a couple of other factors as well, just knowing that that's been in place for several years now and doesn't always ensure that our schools have the right level of supports for our scholars with an IEP. And the piece that Cindy mentioned from the special education funding slide about strategically considering additional allocation to be provided to our schools between July and September. We will be talking to principals, looking at the needs of scholars, thinking about additional scholars that have enrolled. So we're using the weighted formula, but in a different way than we have the past few years, just to do as good a job as we possibly can to ensure that the right level of support is available for our scholars.
I appreciate that. Thank you for not making significant cuts in special education. And on the workbooks, I'm going to ask what I always ask, and that's next time, could we please see them before they are released to the schools? So that way we just have an area of where we know what's going on. I think it would be helpful. And that's all. I'm on.
Board President Mulder.
Cindy, I want to thank you so much for this presentation and the details you shared with us just now. My first question is, you talked a little bit about our largest classrooms at the middle school level being our gym classroom, our gym classes, maybe a choir class, an art, or a special. It's interesting to think about the areas of study in which we think a larger classroom can be appropriate. And for the most part, I've agreed with that approach. I think having a larger choir class can actually strengthen the class, right? It can build upon the sound literally. However, I wonder how we are factoring in the strengths of teachers and teacher experience. So for a really new gym teacher to have 50 7th graders in a class is pretty challenging. Do we look at the experience, the strengths, and the classroom management of our educators? Are we engaging principals and educators in conversations around what the makeup of a classroom can and should look like based on the capacity of the educator themselves?
So I'm going to start with that answer, and I know our associate superintendents of schools are on here, so I'll also see if any of them want to chime in. Physical education, yes, usually is a place where class sizes are large, and usually there is more than one staff person in there. Yes, we definitely work with our principals to make decisions about a teacher match to course, right? That doesn't always work out perfectly, but that is something, especially in the last like 4 or 5 years, I would say has been a conversation that we've had, sometimes where it requires a teacher to make a shift that puts them out of their comfort zone, but is also an important shift that we believe might be best for where the teacher is a good fit and what students need. In terms of thinking about kind of those spaces, it is hard to determine it's hard to know where we will be next year until our principals go through both their course selection at secondary and also begin to populate their workbook to see if we do have any places where class size may be high. Sometimes we also have where class size is really low. At elementary, it's pretty easy for us to make and see that in advance because of the way our elementary schools are designed. But secondary, it is a little bit of both course selection, what are we thinking about, and that process along the way. So I don't know where any of those potential higher class sizes will be at this moment for secondary until we get to kind of that phase 3 part where they start to really talk about their decisions, and we also start to see what students chose for next year.
Cindy and Ross, can I ask, how are you all engaging teachers, principals, and the folks who are working directly with our students in defining it as a priority for specific schools? Our schools are diverse. They have very different needs. They range in size, particularly at the elementary level. How are we talking to our diverse schools about what their diverse needs are?
Again, I will start, but I will invite our associate superintendents of schools. Dr. Jenkins, I don't know if you have any in particular by level, but they are working directly with our principals and have been doing all of that pre-planning with them. So I think it will be important for them to come on. In general, a few things that we have really been thinking about is our schools that are identified as ATSI, that's a federal designation, and what that might mean. We have been thinking a lot about both in terms of stable allocation, in terms of universal needs, targeted needs as well, and what we might want them to consider as they're going into this instructional design process, which can be exciting and creative and also can be stressful. So that is one way that we've been really thinking about that. The second thing I would say at middle school, we have small schools, right? We have DLI schools and then we have larger schools. So we always think about those schools and kind of those 3 chunks at middle school and really help them think differently about their instructional design if they're a small school versus a school that may have DLI and how they're creative with that. But I will pause to see if any of our associate superintendents or Dr. Jenkins wants to provide a little more detail.
Yeah, we'll just have our associate superintendent speak to their level, Dr. Hoffman and Ms. Tubbs, if you want to go first, and then Dr. Hicks. And then I think you explained the rest of it well. Those two are here.
I guess I just need the question a
So Deb, I was asking how we're
little
engaging.
more clear for
schools.
me in terms of how we're structuring the elementary school.
So Deb, you're breaking up, and honestly, I think Cindy's answer was helpful. My question was, how are we engaging our schools, our educators and our principals in making decisions about the unique needs of each school?
So from an elementary perspective, I'm sorry, my connection is struggling. Our Carletra and I met with principals on Saturday this week, and we will continue to meet with them to build an instructional design that is individualized for each school. As somebody noted already, that we have different sizes schools, we have DLI, ELI schools, we have schools that have different populations that we need to attend to. In providing an inclusive service delivery model, we need to think about both the developmental range of the school, and the capacity of the staff to work together in teams. So if you have one teacher per grade level, it's a very different situation than you have a team of teachers per grade levels at third per grade. So if you have 2 teachers versus 5 at a grade level, it's a very different situation in terms of teaming structures and kind of harvesting the strengths of the staff, I would say. So it's pretty unique to each school in that, like Cindy said, that does make it fun and exciting to plan with the SBLTs. All of our principals are working with their SBLTs. I know some of them sent out like last year's allocations in comparison to this year allocations already to their staff to give input. We try to also, I guess a philosophy I have always had is to play to the strengths. So we want to maximize all the strengths of the staff on an individual staff that we can in order to best serve our student population at that time. I'll take a follow-up question, but I guess that's the overview I would provide.
No, honestly, Dr. Hoffman, I couldn't ask for a better answer than that answer. I would say that one, thank you for doing that work this past Saturday. And I think anytime you can emphasize to this board or to our greater community that folks are working, all the time and constantly and in the evenings and in the weekends to do this work. I think it's an important reminder. And also, I think the level of engagement that you just described is really helpful and heartening to hear as a board member, because I think so often it feels like what's brought to us is very disconnected from the process with schools, principals, and educators. And so thank you for building the bridge of what that work looks like. I greatly appreciate your answers to that question. That's it for my questions.
Vice President Pearson.
Can you skip me for now?
Member Castrin.
Thank you. I guess I have one question for Ross. With the reduction in staffing, you have an estimate on what that figure turns out to be and how that gets us closer to 0 from where we start at 7 million in the hole?
So at this point, the approximately 35 FTE that's on the slides we went through earlier, and whatever comes out of resulting unallocated, when we get to that point next fall, the delta for that is going to be somewhere between $4.5 and $6.
Got it. Thank you. And then, my other questions were really aligned with board member Muldrow's questions in terms of when we are doing workshops with principals and staff, how they're making sure that their budget or FTE decisions are in alignment with their school improvement plans. But that was pretty much answered by Dr. Hoffman. So thank you. That's it.
Board Member Simkin. Yes, thank you.
Cindy, I'm wondering, first of all, thank you for all of your work on this. And I'm really appreciating the addition of the AVID classes. I'm wondering what the ratio difference is, or the class size difference is for AVID classes compared to.
Did you say compared to other classes? Sorry, I didn't hear that last part.
Other high school classes, yeah.
Yeah, I would say on average, they are about the same. AVID classrooms usually are between 25 and 28 students. Sometimes they go up to 30. What we see with AVID many times is that we have more applications than students we can serve. Each section at a high school, again, is on average 28 to 30 students in that. So depending on how many sections the school has, times that by that 28 is how many students we can serve. But they definitely are on average and sometimes on the higher end. But they usually don't go above 30 just because we want to make sure our college and career coaches with Boys and Girls Club and some of the other components that are essential to AVID are able to be met.
Okay, so perhaps that is the answer to my next question, which is if the class sizes are around the same and you're looking to continue to increase the number of AVID sections that you're offering, what was the barrier for this upcoming year in stopping rated?
Yeah, I'll explain it and I'll try and make it as simple as possible. So we define full implementation of the AVID elective as 12 sections for a high school. That's 3 sections at every grade level. So 3 at 9th, 3 at 10th, 3 at 11th, 3 at 12th. That is for a few reasons why we have done that. That is aligned with the model of the national model of how AVID operates, as well as what we are able to support financially and through our partnership with the Boys and Girls Club in terms of both when we think about tutorology that happens, when we think about our college coaches that we have, when we think about field trips, additional resources. So kind of the whole package. 3 sections at each grade level is what we think is kind of that sweet spot for a school. East and La Follette have been operating with those 12 sections for many years, and East as a demo site has really done a great job. Last year for West and Memorial, we added 1 section at 9th grade. So they went from 8 sections. They used to have 2 sections at every grade level. They hadn't grown because they were working on their feeder middle schools in terms of growing AVID in their feeder middle schools and really working on selecting the right students for AVID. So they hadn't grown their AVID in a few years. Last year, they were both at a place where they've done a phenomenal job with their implementation that they were ready to take on an additional section at 9th grade. So we added 1 section at West and 1 section at Memorial, which made them have 9 sections total, 3 at 9th grade, 2 10th, 2 11th, 2 12th. What happens is now, those students, we try and hold on to that same cohort of students and they matriculate through the grades. So now we're at the place where this year, those 9th graders will go to 10th. And so we need to add another section at 10th grade and now continue with 3 sections at 9th grade. And then next year we'll add 11th and 12th as those students matriculate up through the grades. Over the next 3 years, all things pending with budget, the goal would be to have 12 sections at Memorial and 12 sections at West High School. Did I confuse you or does that make sense?
It made complete sense.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the focus on AVID and on growing that program. My second question is around the additional 4K sections. Are those going to be offered in our elementary schools, or are those going to be community sites, or is that not yet determined?
No, I think that is determined. I might need to lean on Ross because I know Carletra is not here. Those 4 added sections are all at our elementary schools. Is that correct, Ross? I know there were some considerations about community sites as well, but
4K.
yes.
There was an addition at Emerson. And then I believe the entire program at Henderson shifted to full day, as well as Kennedy shifted to full day, and that got us to a total change of 4.
Yeah, so those are at our elementary schools. I wanted to confirm that at elementary schools, the 4 full day sections.
Okay, thank you so much. That's all my
You're
questions.
welcome. You're welcome.
Board Member Nichols?
Yes, thank you, Cindy, for this really detailed view on how the allocations are kind of created in partnership with principals and school-based leadership teams, and how folks kind of work through the process. It's really appreciated. My question is really just related to Title I. You had mentioned that, okay, and I've lost the slide. There were 5 schools, I think you said, that no longer Title I. Thank you. Yeah. Title I eligible.
Correct.
So that was for this 23-24 school year. 5 that
Will be
will
for,
be-
yep, for next year.
Okay, for next year. Okay, and then for the 1-year extension, are you talking about, weren't the 1-year extensions when a school would be determined not eligible, they would still get like kind of like the 1 year?
Yep. Yes, and so we are we were, exactly. We used to provide kind of this, you are no longer Title I eligible, but we wanted to still kind of give you that soft piece, if you will, to that. And we are no longer doing the kind of like 1 year transition period for Title I. We stopped that last year, and we want to kind of get to a place where we have a more stable set of schools, and we're not creating kind of a few of those schools that fall really at that lower end of the threshold of poverty, where they're on, they're off, they're on, they're off. We don't actually think that that provides stability to schools, and actually is helping see improved outcomes for students. So we're trying to get to a place where the 1 year extension, we're not trying to get to a place, we are at a place where we are no longer doing 1 year extension, and going into next year, we are really going to focus on that 40% threshold and above for schools identified as title.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I know for a few years there had been discussion about really thinking about ways to, I don't know, better determine kind of Title I eligibility. Can you just speak really quickly, hopefully, about how Title I is also a factor in the allocation process? Or if it is, are there any extra allocation or resource? I know there are extra resources, but how does that pan out in terms of the workbook?
Yep.
Or not?
Sure. I will start, and then Jennifer Wallner, who's our Executive Director of State and Federal, if I don't get anything right, she can chime in here. So schools that are identified as title get an additional workbook, if you will, or additional set of money when they receive their MMSD allocated workbook that I just talked about. They then can use those dollars to buy, in simple terms, positions. So they can buy an interventionist, they can buy something for a family liaison, they can buy an assistant principal, etc. So they're able to use those dollars and they convert that to allocation. There is no kind of workbook or allocation from title, but the dollars then are used to purchase staffing if they can afford it, right? There are schools that are the higher poverty and obviously have more money, and if it is where they believe their greatest need is.
Okay, so thank you for that. So that's kind of sitting in a separate workbook or spreadsheet.
But when they go to, one thing I just want to clarify, when we go to kind of this like phase 3 process, all of that is presented together and we like combine that. Jennifer Waldner
Okay.
has to do a separate approval of it, but it all shows in their staffing plan. It's really important. So we see that as one package.
Yep, you were reading my mind. Okay, perfect. Thank you. That's all I have tonight.
Thanks, Cindy, for the presentation. I just have a couple of questions related to the reduction in the workbook staffing levels and the class size information that was shared with us in November. And I am looking specifically at the high schools, understanding that there was a reduction overall in the number of students at high school. But when I'm looking at the class size report from 2022, one of my concerns is that at the high school level, we had a lot of sections in our core classes that were above 30. And the class size policy is to not go above 30. And so for our core classes in English, it was 72 sections across all the high schools. That were 30 or above. For math, it was 44. For science, it was 52. And for social studies, it was 48. And I know I don't have the numbers in front of me. I can't find the class size from the year before, but I know that was an increase in the number of sections over 30 versus the previous year. And so I'm wondering what's being done to take a close look at this, because if we're talking 25% of our English classes across the high schools are above 30, it just makes it really difficult in the high school situation. And so, yeah, I'm just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, that is something that we will definitely be monitoring in April and where we will see course selection. I think a couple of things that are factored into that. When we have both kind of regular English class and when we have honors English classes, the standalone classes, that is one place where we see kind of discrepancies happen and imbalance of class size at 9th and 10th grade specifically. You'll see that sometimes in science, in social studies. Math is not always as imbalanced due to kind of the nature of the course offerings in terms of what students take. So I would say that is definitely a factor for it. And then I would say that other factors are also just the various course offerings that we have. We have a lot of course offerings at our schools, and sometimes certain classes have more students that are interested in it, and they work within teacher certification because you have to do teacher certification, you have to do student interest, and then you have to do courses, kind of that trio together. I would say sometimes that also plays into it. Where we are right now in terms of how we did the allocation, principals get what we call a flex pool. So at the high school level specifically, their teacher pool is kind of combined into a general flex pool. And then principals use that flex pool to make decisions about how many staff they want for English, how many staff they want for math, how many for CTE, based on both the student course selections and also the other factors that they take into consideration. So there is flexibility in terms of how principals are staffing, but I will say a couple of those other things I mentioned before sometimes do play a role into that. At least we've seen that in the past.
Thanks. Can you also speak really briefly into how Pathways plays into that? Because I know when you have a Pathways program and you're trying to maintain the model where those teachers are connected to each other, say an English teacher, a science teacher, and a social studies teacher, can you speak to how that may also play a factor in the size of those classes? And what do you see in the Pathways and how that affects class sizes?
I would say a few years ago, that was definitely an indicator. I think at least last year specifically, and it'll be interesting to see what happens next year based on student applications where we are and kind of just as a system where we decide to go in general. I would say this past year, we didn't have cohort purity that we really tried to maintain in the past. So in the past, what you are talking about, Board Member Gomez-Schmidt, is we were really trying to maintain the purity of both the students with a health science teacher in English, math, science, social studies, and keep them separate, if you will, for a lack of a better term. This past year, we were not able to do that for a variety of reasons. So we had students that may be in a pathway English class, but they were also with a student that didn't choose to be in the pathway and just happened to be in that English class. And where we were really trying to hold the purity was their elective offerings and their experiential learning. And I think that we may be in that kind of place again next year. We'll have to see again based on what its student interest is in pathways and what course selection looks like.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess I'll just add, just as Board President Muldrow added in, taking a look at the multi-age classrooms as a strategy and a budget issue. I think we really do need to take a look at our pathways program and figure out what we are going to do to either go forward with that or change it or do something different, because we're kind of right now caught in this 50-50 model that I'm not sure is a great place for the high schools to be. Okay, thank you. That is all my questions. Yeah, anything else? All right. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Cindy, for being with us here tonight, and we'll look forward to talking to you more in March. All right. We have our referendum update. This is referendum projects update. We have Cedric Hodo and Svetlin Borisov from our operations team, joined by Aaron Zutz from Findorf and Jordan Schultz from Huffman Peel Partners.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Do you want one more chair there, Cedric?
Yeah, why don't you sit? Yeah, no, move on.
I can move.
Really keep you all together.
I can move.
Nope. I got it.
Whichever you wish. Is this in your way? Do you want to go?
You're good, thank you.
I just wanted to make sure.
Didn't mean to kick you out of your chair, Dr. Jenkins.
No, you didn't.
He offered.
So.
All right. All right, Mr. Hodo, I will turn it over to you. I believe you're going to go through the slide presentation and then we'll have time for.
All right, absolutely. First of all, thank you, Committee Chair Gomez-Smith. Appreciate the opportunity to present to the community at large, to the Board President, Board members, Dr. Jenkins, once again, on behalf of Building Services, we thank you for this opportunity. Oh, yeah. Jesse, if you don't mind, can you help me with the slides? As always, we anchor everything into our core values. Goal number one, every child is on track to graduate ready for college, career, and community. Goal two, district and every school in it is a place where children, staff, and family thrive. Goal three, African-American children and youth excel in school. Next slide.
Good evening, Svetlin Borisov, Director of Building Services. Our mission of building services is to effectively manage, maintain, and upgrade the buildings.
The district mission and vision statement: to achieve MMSD's graduate vision and strategic framework goals, we work collaboratively to ensure all students have access to high quality, equitable, inclusive instruction and services leading to deep learning and resulting in college, career, and community readiness. I'll pass it over to Svetlin. Next slide.
The mission of building services is to effectively manage, maintain, and upgrade the buildings and grounds of Madison Metropolitan School Districts in order to provide the highest quality, energy efficient environment for education.
Thank you. Tonight's presentation, we have with us Aaron Zutz, Director of Project Management at Findorf. Say hello, Aaron. And we also have Jordan Schultz, Vice President of Huffman Peel Partners. Say hello, Jordan.
Hello.
Jordan represents a consultant for MMSD who is responsible for supporting building services. Once again, thank you to you guys. They are the owner's rep for the referendum 2020. Next slide. The presentation tonight focuses on a progress update for the referendum. We also will talk about a financial update of the referendum and what to look ahead in the rest of 2023. With this overview, I would like to invite Aaron Zutz to update us on the referendum project status. Aaron.
Thank you for having us here tonight. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about a couple things here. We want to just talk briefly about the project schedule. So we're very excited that things are progressing on schedule right now towards our August 24 completion date, and we're nearing 50% completion on the projects. The budget is tracking in line with what was presented last spring. Jordan is going to talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation here. Learning, we've had a lot of opportunities to engage students to take advantage of this construction project to provide some education and opportunities for those students. We're going to continue to do such, working with the administration. And then communications, we've been working to make sure that there are regular updates both on the progress of the project, but also any impacts to the students, staff, and the community. So student engagement, these are just a couple of the larger bullets of what we have been working on. This doesn't encompass everything that we've done. Probably the most notable is the Youth Apprentice. Right now we have 7 students who are working throughout the school year as part of the State of Wisconsin Apprenticeship Program, gaining experience in a skilled trade. They're working through a variety of trades with both Findorf and our subcontractors to gain experience. We've done a variety of career panels speaking to students during the lunch hour. Most recently, we did one at West High School in Spanish. So that was the first one in the non-English language that we've done. We've also had the opportunity to do a number of job shadows for students, providing a little bit more one-on-one education and opportunity for students to talk to our staff about what a career in construction is. And then some presentations to class ed, particularly some of the STEM classes, some of the technology education classes. And as the project progresses, we are continuing to work with the administration to look at how we can continue to engage both the students, but also their parents as we talk about what careers in construction can be. Certainly from our perspective, there's a great need within the industry. I think it's a great career for students to make sure that they're informed about and consider. So just a brief progress update. So kind of school by school here. So West High School, we have a photo of the pool that's under construction at the corner of Highland and Regent. That's obviously the most notable portion of the project. In addition to that, which will be completed in August, we have renovations that are going throughout the school. At East High School, we have a picture here of the multi-purpose room that was added in the courtyard. We also on the exterior of the building have the cafeteria addition going on, and then additional renovations moving throughout the school. I'm sure many people have seen the openings and scaffolding on the exterior of the school to move materials throughout that building. And then La Follette, we have a photo here of the new gym addition that is going on right now. That's scheduled for completion this summer. And we're also working through renovations in the school. I would also note just on La Follette, when we talk about what is it like to be 50% complete, for those of you familiar with the floor plan of La Follette, if you kind of look at the courtyards, in a couple months, we'll be done with the entire west half of the school. So there's a lot of duration left in the project, but in terms of the progress, things are moving very quickly. We're touching a lot of areas as we start to progress through this project.
The pit is gone.
The pit is infilled, it is enclosed. Yes, yes. On the next slide, Memorial, we have additions going on 2 areas of the school to provide additional arts opportunities and music opportunities. Those are nearing completion right now, and we have renovations that will continue there. Notably, we'll also have work going on at Mansfield Stadium this summer that we're preparing for. Capitol High School is under construction right now. The demolition is complete. Mechanical, electrical, plumbing rough-ins are going in place. The photo there is on the north side of the building. We have a new elevator shaft that will provide accessibility to all 3 floors of the building. And then finally, Badger Rock, which will also complete this summer. We have a photo there. We're largely enclosed. There's already drywall going on the 3rd floor. There's glazing in most of the openings. That kind of front section that you're seeing there is the library. There is still some plastic in there, but that is progressing along very quickly. So we're very excited throughout all these projects to see the progress and the opportunities for the students and community.
Super, thanks, Aaron. Again, my name is Jordan Schultz, and we work on the project management side on behalf of school districts. These first 2 slides are just recaps of where we were at last May when we were kicking off the project. So these were presented at that time. This initial one is really just showing a market overview and a snapshot to compare where we were at in general market at 9 to 12% annual inflation. And then where we were at with the project and through the cost management of the team, keeping it down to about 5% annual growth. Next slide. Again, slide from last May. So the punchline here, again, $317 million referendum. The costs that we had discussed at that time were the 28 million to kind of catch us up to that time, to that date, bringing the total to 345. And then we had noted that we'd be looking at approximately a 4% additional contingency need above and beyond that. Next slide. So this slide is really just comparing May of 22 to February of 23, where we are now. So in May, we were less than 5% complete with the construction. And like we said, you know, we're expecting an additional 4% contingency need to cover project costs. Here we are in February, and like Aaron said, nearly 50% complete, which is fantastic. Our current projection to finish is now adjusted to 4.6% from the 4%. And again, this is an aggressive but achievable goal that the entire project team is buying into. Several of these additional pieces of scope to bulletize is number 1, 2, 3, right? Additional environmental work, as we know, are old schools, a lot of work there. Number 2, unforeseen conditions, scope modifications. And then number 3, external moving service. That's for an outside vendor, outside of MMSD, to be doing the moving rather than in-house labor. Next slide. So 2 major areas as we address the contingency needs. So number 1 is cost management. Just like we've been doing for the last year, is to really rigorously and comprehensively review costs on a weekly basis. For the entire project team, it's Findorf, it's EUA, it's building services, it's ourselves working through the process every week to be sure that no additional costs are getting added to the project that are absolutely not necessary for the benefit of staff and students. We really utilize, we're on our 3rd round of value engineering, or as we would call it, cost reduction. So it's really analyzing and saying, look, if we could buy carpet, for example, that is same quality, but a lesser cost, let's do that. Are there units for the air conditioning that we could buy quality, lesser cost? And it's just really being rigorous at various junctures to say, is this scope that is needed for the project? Is there a way of reducing that cost so that we can contain our contingency need to where we project it to be? Cost management on that side doesn't cover all of it. So the big bullet here is project funding. The solution by reassigning the $15 million of ESSER 3 HVAC allocation is really the best way of addressing the additional needs for contingency without removing critical components of the schools, right? While we're 50% complete with the project, all of that work has been released to the completion of the project, right? So subcontractors have been let, all the materials have been ordered, et cetera, et cetera. So to claw that back to try to cover some of the additional contingency needs at this point would yield probably on the order of 50 to 60 cents on the dollar, which is just reality, right? And so that's a path that we don't want to go, hence the ESSER 3 allocation. And again, I think Svelin can speak more to it if need be, but really the ESSER 3 allocation would be hard to use at this point with its original target, just because of the timing, both because of lead times for materials, as we've all known throughout the project being an issue, and then also just the time for finishing the design. With that, I'll pass it to Svetlin.
And before that, let me just clarify, because I want to make sure that the board is understanding the ask here. We can see the finish line. We're 50% complete. We are just about there. Everything in which the community asks us to bring, we have brought forth. Despite all the prevailing conditions we've been under, building services in conjunction with Findorf, Huffman have found a solution that does not impact the general fund. 15 million has already been allocated for HVAC upgrades in the current referendum spending plan. or ESSER 3 spending plan. What we're asking the board to do is reappropriate that 15 million to be put back toward the completion of the referendum for the HVAC systems. And so we see this as a potential solution that will get us to the finish line. We are not attempting to impact the general fund in no shape, form, or fashion. We realize the tough job that the board has in all of the pressures. So we're trying to find the solution. Dr. Jenkins has asked us to find the solution. So we work very closely with Ross and the ESSER team to utilize these. The other caveat that's important here is the 15 million that's already allocated for non-referendum schools, HVAC upgrades. We cannot finish those projects. We have to order. The lead time for the materials is a year's time. And this money for ESSER has to be spent within a year. We will not be able to complete that at all. And so that money then, what do we do with it? And so our analysis is we would like for the board to consider the option of redeploying that plan and those resources where we can complete it. We think that's the most useful resources already allocated to our building services. Next slide, and I think we have one more slide and then we'll.
So looking ahead, Building Services would like to provide monthly updates to Board of Education and the Operations Work Group on all referendum projects until we finish them in at the end of August 24. We are also working in close collaboration with Findorf and Huffman-Keel partners on continuous communication and updates on phasing and summer work. We continue to work with MMSD Communications Department on upgrading the district and community social media and website updates. I'm also very happy to share that Building Services is working proactively on creating our very first monthly newsletter, and we are hoping that we will be able to share this with our MMSD community in the upcoming month or two. And finally, we will continue to collaborate with Findorf and Huffman-Keel partners on student engagement initiatives, and we are looking forward to sharing more updates with the district and the Board of Education as we create more opportunities for our students. And with that, our presentation is ended, and we're open to any questions or feedback.
Great.
Turning back over to our committee chair, Gomez.
Dr. Jenkins, did you have one?
Yeah, I just want to say to all the board and to our community that I am just so proud of this team, Hodo's leadership, along with Swetland and just Findorf. I just wanted to also say publicly, this is a community school partnership at the highest level. We're facing tough times economically, and we had to find a way to respond to our public $350 million investment. And you all have been doing it step by step. And I just want to say to you, thank you. Just don't know how much it means, because often when you're going like this, the school district takes the hit every time. We're talking about, as Board Member Castrin said, community stepping up. Indoor has stepped up in this and found the solution. But Mr. Hodo, your leadership and integrity dealing with this. I just cannot thank you, not swelling enough, for the hard work that you put in, because I know you're understaffed. I know that, okay, but you have put the time in. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Board Member Vandermeulen, followed by Board Member.
Yes, first I want to say thank you. I think you've done an amazing job with the project, especially when inflation has been at record highs for the highest in 40 years. I mean, that's reasonable. One question, why are we outsourcing the moving costs instead of using our own?
Yeah, so very good question. Jordan, if you want to start it off, I can provide some context.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think just the sheer need for all the phasing, as well as the, I think early assumptions may have assumed, hey, there's potential for both custodial staff as well as teaching staff. We all know teaching staff has a full-time job already, right? They're more than a full-time job. Yeah. And then custodial staff, same thing. They already have plenty of, so I think, again, maybe it was, I can't say really here nor there at this point, other than the fact that there's just a lot more work than I think early assumptions from several years ago.
If I may, if the way I look at it, Board Member Vanderbilt, we're investing in staff, getting others. I can't see them not teaching.
Yeah, I can't either.
It's
Exactly.
an investment versus an expense when we look at it like this. And Dr. Jinks is spot on. I want to make it clear, we attempted to use internal resources, but the summertime is times for the custodians to get their own present building under control, cleaned, MSCR. We have a lot of other resources and we found that we couldn't do it. So when we looked at the phasing plan and the opportunity for the on-site teams to support, we needed lifts, we needed manpower, and we unfortunately did not have that. We had people out with COVID and multiple other factors. And unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to move a new extra movers. Moving schools are totally different than a house now. We're talking.
I just don't know why you guys didn't ask for it to begin with.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. I'm quite sure our predecessors probably did the best they could in finding a budget around that, but there was some amount, I think it was 30,000 that was allocated. That one you can get us past a couple of days. Yeah. Supplies cost more than the moving supplies cost more than that. But the manpower was the more important, and the time factor in the transition from closing one phase into opening the school.
You really have one other thing, which is more of a thank you than anything else. One, thank you for placing Dale as part of Capital West. Appreciate that. Two, would love to see it updated at some point on the furniture and to make sure that everything is accessible and working so that we can be ready for school.
And we know you're excited about SAIL. We know the community and the board. This was something that was very passionate. This was one of those things we had to go back and redesign it. Schematic designs, et cetera, and the costs attached to it. They're working, and the team is working on getting some drawing and rendering, the cost attached to that to get it. But I think SAIL is going to be a wonderful part of Capitol High. We're excited about it. Aaron and his team is moving progressively to complete that, and we'll get you update rendering.
I really appreciate, because to have these students spend half a day in the high school and half a day in their own program, then they can, for those who need a little extra help, but still want to be a part of the curriculum and a part of the school, because these are our students. It's an incredible opportunity, and I thank you very much for it. I'm done.
Vice President Pearson.
Yeah, I just want to say amazing job on making sure that we delivered as much as possible on the referendum that was approved by the community, especially around the student engagement. I know that I made a point about that, like when we kind of first started, of making sure that our youth were somehow attached to constructing their space that they will be utilizing. So I'm really glad to hear that we've also made good on that as well, and a lot of student engagement in the apprenticeships and such. And my hope is that even after this project is completed, that we find some way to still include our young people in some of those paths that, you know, they've been able to experience, and some of the opportunities that we've been able to create, especially as we're looking into, you know, in the future. Right now, based off the market, there's not enough steam fitters. There's not enough, you know, folks that are doing construction. There's not enough like plumbers, electricians, and all those kind of skilled labor jobs. So it's really great to see that there's these opportunities that we're also providing for young people to see a different path than necessarily, you know, the traditional path that folks want to say. So thank you on really making sure that happens. My question is along the lines about the moving. Do we know like what the projected amount like cost that is, or is it just kind of there what we have to come back and vote on that?
I don't think we have to come back and play. I think we try to capture everything right now that we think we need to get to the finish line. We've projected it based upon this summer's moves. We've had Huffman helped us with an RFP that went out so that we can streamline costs associated to moving. They know how many to meet, how it's going to be tagged, what's going to be thrown away, and the time frame. So I think we're comfortable in the area. I don't anticipate any additional costs coming.
Yeah, that should be captured. I mean, you know, right now it's basically with the RFP. All right, get the several different movers lined up so that they're competing against one another for rates as well as manpower, because you really don't want to get in a crunch where it's like, hey, we're trying to move east and west and you know, all at the same time. You don't have enough people. So by diversifying, we will save on cost, but we also have the labor coverage. The projection right now to the end of the project is nested within that 15.7.
So it's in that 15. Okay.
Yep.
Got it. And then my other question is around, just so I'm clear on the ask that you're asking for the board. You're asking that we have the 15 mil that is already set aside on building services. And instead, you're asking that we kind of swap of how we're utilizing. So utilizing ESSER 3 so that we don't lose those funding, opposed to using the 15 million that is already allocated, or
No, so you've already voted, very good question, first of all, but you've already voted on the ESSER plan.
Right.
In the ESSER plan, we appropriated 15 million toward non-referendum school upgrades, our worst performing schools, so to speak. But those systems still work. We're trying to upgrade them. What we're asking us to do is, since we can't complete those schools anyway at all, we don't have enough lead time. And with the unforeseen conditions that we ran into with environmental related issues. I think it was extremely important for us to be very cautious and very prudent in using the district's money and the community's money. I would rather, with the permission of the superintendent, our recommendation is to redeploy that 15 million back to the referendum to get us to the finish line.
got it.
I think there's no other option based upon the work that we've done. We've been up about 16, 18 hours a day for the last 2 years in getting this. And when I tell you, our team has really worked hard. We know how hard and important this was to the board. And we wanted to carry this out. Dr. Jenkins has worked with us day in and day out, ensuring that we capture this cost and we land this plan correctly. And so we see no other path. We've walked with Ross. He's worked with us, and I think that this is the most.
Okay, great. Okay, so now I understand. So it's basically changing the line item to be something different so that you can finish the referendum project. And then my last question is really clear. When you say that the future involvement is like the student engagement opportunities, are you engaging like student senate, or like what realm are you kind of thinking of how you're gonna get the student input? Because I'll say not surveys.
We are working on, unfortunately, we don't have anything planned currently that we can share in a public setting, but we do have quite exciting opportunities that we are working with FinDorf. Some of them are around laying bricks for Southside project. Once we have allocated the appropriate timeline, because right now it's for our students to be doing that outside. But once we have these timelines, I'm hoping that we'll be given the opportunity to present to the board what these engagement opportunities are and what is the timeline.
And also I would add, which I think is critically important, in the planning phase, the student senate and committees were all part of each of the design phase itself. So EUA worked and listened to all student concerns. We listened to ADA accessibility concerns. And so when we factored in everything that students asked us to do and we can incorporate into the design phase, we did that down to the minutest of details that you may not think about. Turn radiuses for a wheelchair accessible person going into the restroom. Those are the things you don't think about until you're actually in that wheelchair itself. Having spatial recognition for transition points and coloring of the floors, lights that's not ringing. All those things was important as we try to make the transition accommodate what the students asked us to do, and we did not want to compromise in certain areas.
Yeah, no, I would just say like, thank you for that, for both of that comments or response. I would say, definitely don't utilize surveys. Thank you for talking surveys. I think, right now with some of the updates that have been done to some of the high schools, I do know that some of the young folks have mentioned, this around some of the things that we've already updated, like the upkeep of that. And so having students possibly be a part of that conversation too, just so that they're in the process and just maintaining their space. So thank you all. That's all my questions.
Thank you.
Board Member Nichols.
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for a great update. It is always good news to hear about the progress on all the referendum projects. And you all have been kicking butt. Okay. So I appreciate, I know that wasn't very professional, but I'm just saying, for almost 50% completion is pretty amazing. So I just need to also clarify, is the 15 million that we already voted on, is that now going towards the 4.6 contingency to get us to the completion, right? So it's filling that line? Okay,
That's our ask.
that's the ask, okay.
We approved that will go to that.
Yeah, okay. And so I guess what I'm wondering is for the 3 schools that had originally been named as the schools that needed the updated HVAC systems, what are your thoughts on that around future work? Because I do know it seemed like at one point we were hearing from staff pretty clearly about HVAC systems overall needing improvement. And so even if you can't do it on the ESSER 3 funds, like what are your thoughts about future work?
I'll give you the, first of all, very good question. So that he certainly will give you the technical part of it, but from our vantage point, I would like for the community to know that we have done a lot in the community for our elementary schools that it was originally designed for. From bathroom upgrades, tile upgrades, concrete, pavement, playgrounds, gymnasiums, lighting in the classrooms, LMCs. We've done a lot of upgrades to a lot of these schools. I would not say that it was the 2 schools that they're independent. There are a lot of elementary schools that need some upgrades when it comes to our HVAC. I think we chose those 2 because of the timing and cost amount. So that and his team, or building services team, has been working on getting the architectural designs to start it itself. And so we have to pay for the designs in time. And so the designs getting paid for so that we can begin to place ordering and whatnot, we just didn't have the timing for it. So I don't think it's leaving out any elementary schools. I think that we need to, as we move into capital planning, that's one of the things I think that we should talk about on the board. We should talk about capital planning and how to deploy resources to building services that can continue the upgrade of HVAC systems long term. Right now, I think we're not at this point, but I think we should get there. Their current HVAC systems work. I want to make sure I'm perfectly clear on that.
Are the 3 schools, I see the 3 schools that I thought were listed in the budget book were Sherman, Shabazz, and Anana. Were those the 3 schools or?
We actually have a few more projects and that's
Okay,
these were
on this original 15 million.
3, but we also have backhaul gompers along with Crestwoods, which we have started to design on these projects and where we can pick it up from if we get approved to reallocate the ESSER 3 funding into the referendum, it will be the first one on the next renovations round, and we will continue to work towards installing geothermal systems. Despite the long lead time, this is the right answer for us in the institution setting the tone for the others.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Okay, so there were some other projects identified that maybe didn't make the last printing.
Correct. So to your point, we had a consultant PRA to come out and assess all of our HVAC systems.
Yeah.
The ones that were cost effective in the not in the most optimal condition. And so we were going to try to begin working on taking a letter down and try to push it to higher.
Okay, yeah, I can see how this would all come back to kind of a longer term facility upgrade discussion and our kind of our green
initiatives.
Green initiatives. Okay, so
to the geothermal projects, you can't, if we're gonna design them, let's design them right, let's get it right where it meets our 2040 goals. Yeah, I think that's another long-term conversation.
Yeah, thank you. So as a final process question, the board already voted on this budget and the $15 million and the ESSER plan were already voted on. So thank you for the transparency about wanting to use the funds in a different manner than what was originally listed. I think in some of the ESSER projects, we will have other examples, maybe not to this dollar amount, but I think we're going to see some fluidity or movement with ESSER projects, right? So I guess from a process question, does the board need to actually do anything? Even though we've already voted and approved on this budget?
Because it's changing the contract. So we don't have to, I thought, because we changed the contract.
No, it's the purpose, not the contract, because the contract hasn't become.
Okay, that's where I was wrong. I apologize. Sorry for the confusion.
No, I just wanted to clarify. Okay, so it doesn't sound like there's anything, we don't have to formally take action on this, but we just wanted transparency about what went in the budget book is now shifting to how the dollars will be used.
Correct.
I mean, you all will take care of that with the state. Yeah, okay, great. Thank you.
I think the next step for the board will be actually once we are ready to prepare the contracts, if we get the approval for that. So this will go through the consent agenda once we are ready with the paperwork, but
It'll be a contract modification, the vendor's contract.
Okay, maybe that's.
I also want to acknowledge.
It was.
Yeah.
Because the federal funding.
Yeah, I also want to acknowledge it in the public setting. EUA is not here, but they have been with us through thick and thin. There's our design partners and architects. So I do want to recognize them. Because we've been going back and forth. Every time there's a change in something, somebody adds something, they have to go back and redesign that. So just like the sale projects and things of that nature. So I do want to recognize their hard work, although they're not here with us.
Thank you for doing that, because I did miss that when I said Fendor, EUA has been right there in Fendor.
Board President Muldrow.
Thank you so much, Board Chair. I want to thank you all for this presentation and for all the work that you've done to renovate our schools. And I also want to acknowledge that our kids will walk into these schools on their first day of school and not know what they used to look like. You know, it's hard to impress a 15-year-old with the furniture in a classroom. But I'll tell you this, I went to East High School and the first time I saw the theater remodeled, I cried. I cried because of what that space had meant to me as a young person and the potential that space has now. And when you think about our young people who are in our schools right now, particularly our young people who started in 2020, they have had a heck of a 4 years in high school, and they will leave their high schools half under construction. And so part of what I've thought a lot about is what it looks like to engage our alumni around this process. I had a student who reached out to me after graduating in 2020 and said, you all should have an alumni prom for us because we didn't get to have prom. So we have whole groups of kids who didn't get to have prom, who didn't get to have graduation, who are never going to see the final result of what you all were working on, and they should. I also think we need to think really strategically about how we want to invite our community in to celebrate and see these schools, because I think the work that you all have done is tremendous, and the people who will recognize it are the people who they used to look like. And so I look forward to celebrating this, and I look forward to engaging our community, and I look forward to engaging our alumni to get to celebrate what this means. The schools I've been the most concerned about are Nuestro Mundo, Badger, and Alice, or the Southside School, in part because those projects are completing this summer. And so it's really reassuring to hear that we have a strategy for moving. One of the things this board does not talk about a lot is how many people this project employs. We are spending taxpayer dollars, and we are also employing this community with those taxpayer dollars. That is a stimulus to this community. It's a benefit to this community. Over the course of 5 years, I believe we've employed thousands of people to work on these projects. Can you name that specifically?
Well, I'll certainly get that information for you in writing to be detailed and specific, but I do know, Jordan, if you want to share the various contract companies we've worked with thus far, moving RFPs at least.
Yeah, no, we could pull it all together. I mean, we can, go with others. We have a variety of vendors just on that side, but I would say, yeah, we could put together some numbers in terms of, the move companies, the furniture companies, all the contractors that are out there, subcontracting, et cetera. I mean, I think you're on the right order of magnitude for that, which is fantastic.
I think it's something that we need to emphasize, champion, and be very proud of.
Absolutely.
Because we have invested in our schools, but we've also invested in the people of this community. And these projects have resulted in real jobs and union jobs for lots and lots of people and lots of families. And for that, I think we should be incredibly proud. The last thing I want to say is I think because our students are going to walk into our schools and not know or remember what they used to look like, I think having before and after imagery is really important. I think that it is easy to take work for granted. It is easy to forget where we started. And I think that we need to document it in a variety of creative, artistic, and interesting ways. And I think our students are actually equipped to help us do that. And so I think using social media, using TikTok, using the talents of the young people that we work with to say, this is what it looked like, 6 months ago, and this is where we are today. I think that is a real significant opportunity. I cannot thank you all enough for this work. That's it for my questions.
I love the idea. That sounds like a case study for me.
Can you also add one other thing to that request, because we've been talking about it? Also come back showing the diversity. We had talked about, remember, women increase working on these various projects. I don't need lost.
Yes.
And this is just a whole.
You need disabled contractors.
Yeah. Any of those things like that we've talked about, to add that, I think it'd be good for itself. Because there are not a lot of women in construction. Let's just put that out. Very skilled positions.
We have also talked with Findorf and continue to have these discussions about inviting the community, and this would be a great opportunity for the community to step in as well. We had some ideas around that, but we will continue to work forwards to reality for our see the referendum sites while they're in construction.
And I think it's something in our board member management, it's one of the things that we talked about was those community listening sessions that the board wanted to have. And I know that we've thrown out a lot of dates, and so if I think it's a beautiful thing for us to gather feedback and listen closely to what our constituents have to say. I also strongly encourage the board members, as new faces come online, they're opening up very fast now. I mean, you may be missing them as they come online from MSCR locations that came online. I strongly encourage you to come out and look at the locations, the impact. We have not, necessarily documented because we've been just inundated with getting them open. But the impact to the kids is so refreshing. It is a wonderful thing to see a kid just simply enjoy the new space, new air conditioning, new seating. It is huge for us. And we're giving none but kudos out to our teams at the unit level and to the principals. And I'm sure our principals that are listening tonight, but I just want to let the community know that we know what you asked us to do. We intend on landing this plane. We know how important it is to you. I remember from day one, your demands from student engagements, everything that you asked, and I think you have a right to lead this community in that manner. So thank you. I want to thank Dr. Jenkins. He's been with us day and night getting this done. There's nothing that he doesn't know about this referendum. I want to thank him for his tutelage. Everything that we ran into, sticker shock, trouble-wise, he's been helping us strategize and get to the finish line together. And again, I want to thank him for his support and giving us necessary resources to
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Anyone who didn't get a chance? All right, all of my questions were covered, but I just wanted to underscore the importance for us going forward of really taking a look at our long-term facilities plan. We need to make sure that for future boards and future generations that we aren't leaving our schools kind of kicking the can down the road to the improvements that really need to be made to make sure we have great learning environments for our students and great places to work for our staff. So again, much appreciation for all the work that you were doing to get these 6 projects done all at the same time, and to continue to do that over the next year and a half. So we'll look forward to the updates. So thanks so much.
Entertain the motion.
Hold on 1 second. That is the last part of our agenda. While I will entertain a motion to adjourn, we will be moving to the next workshop immediately after this meeting. So and we'll take a short break. With that, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Right. Joanna, your advisory vote?
Yeah, I approve.
All right. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Good night, everyone.
Yes.
You have a quick question.